Chapter 1. He was entering the institute. It was the first day after the holidays, and he didn't want to start 5th grade. He had just moved to Canelones, which seemed a large and crowded city. He came from a small town nearby, where all people knew each other. At high school, he was told to go to room 13. When he was entering, he felt as if all eyes were on him. Saying "excuse me," he sat at the end of the classroom. The first day had been a disaster. He had come late, but worst of all, nobody had talked to him. To be continued. Chapter 2. He was feeling awful, missing his friends, his house, his dog, and especially his mother, who hadn't moved yet because of her job. He locked himself in his room and turned up the volume of the music. Suddenly, he couldn't bear it anymore and started crying. He didn't have dinner nor breakfast the next day. He didn't move from his room until high school time. His father was really worried. He tried to approach the boy, but he refused to open the door. To be continued. Chapter 3. The man went to his shop, still worried. In that moment, after 24 hours, Chris left his room and walked to the institute. That day was different. He entered, sat on a table in the middle of the classroom, and then took out his books. Suddenly, the door was opened and he looked up. A pretty girl named Carla entered and sat next to him. He didn't hear a word of that lesson. Every word that came out of her mouth was captured and recorded in his memory. He laughed many times, even though the jokes weren't so good. To be continued. Chapter 4. I think it was love at first sight. After several days of conversations, they already knew each other well enough. So, he invited her to go to the dancing club called El Canuto. That Saturday night, he picked her up and they enjoyed a lot, dancing and laughing. The next day, she invited him to drink mate at the park. They really enjoyed being together. Chris had never been in love before until now. He was all day thinking about her. They spent days, weeks, months like this until he declared his love and they became serious. He even started to improve his grade. But that day arrived. Neither of them would ever forget it. To be continued. Chapter 5. She was about to pick him up to go for a walk and get to know the city, but when the father opened the door, she was told the terrible news. Chris was being taken to hospital after a motorbike accident. They drove there as fast as they could. The doctors didn't let them in because the patient had just arrived and they were occupied with him. The girl was crying desperately, and his father was nervous, walking along the corridor. After a while, a doctor came and reported on his state. The situation was delicate. Chapter 6. He was in a coma. They spent days and nights taking turns between the girl and the father to stay in the hospital. The day he came out of the coma, his father was the first who entered. A few minutes later, she finally met with his boyfriend. Getting closer to kiss him, she discovered the truth. He had turned blind during the accident.
Both cried, immersed in a big hug. She reminded him how much she loved him and that she would always be by his side. When he was released from hospital, it was terrible. Seeing the world in black was really weird. He felt awful and isolated from the world. Once again, he went to his room, this time accompanied by Carla, and turned the radio on, very loudly. The only thing she could do was to hug him again, while he cried his sadness out. He had now a new opportunity to start over from a different perspective.